XDEFIANT is one of the games of all time. It is one of the games that break the mold and showed us that gaming, even AAA gaming, actually can bring something new to the table. In the case of XDEFIANT, its whole shtick seems to be that they're the COD killer and that their product is a better game in any way, shape, or form, mostly by going back to its roots, but most specifically by turning matchmaking and skill-based matchmaking, something that's more commonly known as SBMM, onto its head. So let's go over how Ubisoft is changing the AAA gaming landscape with XDEFIANT and what other developers can learn to create a more enjoyable product. For as long as gamers have remembered, almost every multiplayer game, at the very least every AAA multiplayer experience that releases, usually comes with its own skill-based matchmaking. This is an intended feature generally aimed to shield lower level players and give them a fighting chance by pinning them against enemies that are around their own skill level, which can be good in theory. After all, you do want to protect casuals if you want to keep them around, but it doesn't come without a cost. The primary one is that most forms of skill-based matchmaking comes at the cost of the upper 50% of the player base, the ones that are better than the average player but not good enough to deal with the hardcore top 1% TTV sweats. In most SBMM models, they seem to be thrown to the wolves. It also comes at a cost of the feeling of improvement, because no matter what you do, no matter how much you improve, the game will always try to balance out the matches so that they're even and have an equal chance of going your way or you losing, meaning that as you continue getting better and progressing, you're not gonna feel any improvement. Your only reward will be more difficult enemies or even worse teammates. You never get to feel your actual improvement firsthand. In most cases, skill-based matchmaking also opens up a lot of risk of abuse. I mean, you're telling me that there are lobbies absolutely filled with noobs that are easy kills? Yes, please. And all you need to do is create a new account or intentionally lose enough games in a row where the matchmaking thinks you are a lot worse than you are, after which it will start putting you in these bot lobbies just to avoid you uninstalling the game. SBMM also creates a lot of suspicion of the games themselves, you know, the legitimacy of the very lobbies that you are playing in. In some, maybe even many games, players report that they can feel a sort of a 50-50 matchmaking, where it seems like the game is giving you an easy win only to hit you with a hard loss against players that are clearly way out of your league, usually back to back, and then with that same experience repeating over and over again. In some games like Apex Legends, which I came from before I started playing the finals, it was incredibly obvious when you got a game gifted to you, which made the win or high kill game or whatever really feel like it didn't mean anything. So being good at the game kind of just made you feel hollow. But the reason I'm bringing up SBMM is giving you guys an idea of just how prevalent this is. And there's also a very strong anti-SBMM sentiment in a large part of the gaming community, especially in the Call of Duty community, which seems to have been one of the main reasons, or at least what has prompted Ubisoft in making a stance and declaring that XDEFIANT are changing the landscape and have decided that they won't have SBMM. And the way that they achieve this is that until the player hits level 25, they are able to play in the so-called welcome playlist, which does have a form of SBMM enabled, which then matches you with players around your skill bracket to have a noob-friendly experience. But once you level up past level 25, or if you manually queue into the other modes, you are on your own. And instead of trying to find like-minded players or like skilled players in the casual, non-ranked modes, it will instead match you based on your latency to the server, as in your ping, then whether or not players have each other blocked, and then it ensures that the party sizes in the lobby are the same. So if there are duos or solos, they want that to be equal, and then it tries to match regions together so that they share the same language. And after it has gone through all of that, it will match based on the input method, and finally it will match players based on their platform. The matchmaker will go through these conditions and create matches based on these conditions in that very order. I also want to give a huge props to Ubisoft here, since I easily found this information on their own website, and by being transparent with the player base, we can trust that the matchmaker will give us a fair experience without us having to worry that the game somehow is rigged for or even against us. Now obviously, not having SBMM in a game is going to make it sweaty. You can't really have a casual experience where you're, jumping around, frolicking, watching the roses and just scoring kills all over the place unless you're ahead of the skill curve, which will be a matter of randomness whether more skilled players are in your lobby or not. So again, since the players you get put up with and against is completely random, full RNG other than the conditions we mentioned earlier, the worse you are at the game, the higher the chance will be that when you queue up, you're going to be put in a lobby with players that are better than you. Just if you look at it through probability and statistics. On the flip side, the better you are at the game, the higher the chance is of you getting put into a lobby solely by players that are worse than you, meaning that higher skilled players are more likely to have fun in this system and less skilled players probably not as much. And to many, that is fair. Personally, as a player who has been taking the hit by SBMM through years and years of AAA gaming experience, I'm glad to see a company trying this out and seeing if catering towards the actual skilled players, or rather we should say not defending the less skilled ones, at the very least past a certain point, seems to be a better experience. But whether it will succeed in the days of modern AAA gaming, where everyone has gotten used to it working a certain way, we're just gonna have to wait and see. But obviously SBMM is not the only hot topic in modern games that XDefiant takes a huge spin in tackling. The next one of these is that XDefiant by default also has input-based matchmaking. This means complete separation between controller players and mouse and keyboard players. This is their solution, and honestly probably the only fair solution to a massive problem that started showing its horns with crossplay becoming more mainstream, as I understand it, around the release of Fortnite's crossplay back in 2018. And we can drone on and on and on whether mouse and keyboard is too strong or if controller is too strong, and depending on the community or on the game, you will get different answers. I mean, in Apex, high-level players are under the understanding that aim assist and controller is too strong of an input, and in Call of Duty, it's actually the opposite, where if you got to the point that mouse and keyboard is a banned input in the CDL, that being the Call of Duty League as in the game's professional circuit. Ubisoft realized full separation is the best solution, with the possibility of opting into mixed input lobbies if somebody does want to play with or against the other input, but as a whole it keeps the lobbies fair and there's no randomness or unfairness, sort of like not having SBMM enabled. The only issue is that input-based matchmaking is disabled by default in the game's ranked mode, meaning that no matter what you do, you will be forced to play with or against the other inputs if you do play ranked. But seeing as ranked hasn't been released fully, I'm hoping to see input-based matchmaking become the norm in the more competitive modes as well, though as with anything else that goes on with this game, only time will tell. On top of that, XDefiant also has a huge selection of settings that allow you to tailor the game however you want. I mean, in the gameplay and the UI section alone, you can change your FOV, ADS behavior, whether it's toggle or hold, your ADS sensitivity transition, whether you can melee during ADS or not, if heavy decides interrupts your reload or not, whether your crouch or sprint is tap or hold, and so much more. The list just keeps going. And the only real complaint I have here is that there isn't a way to have one key for toggle crouch and another for holding crouch, at least not that I've found. But either way, the amount of options that the game has on release is staggering, and I don't think I've seen a game give you so many different ways to customize your experience ever before. Speaking of settings, and I don't have a good segue for this, so something else you can change with settings is of course your graphics or something. There's lots of talk about the visual direction that XDefiant has taken. The game has very plain graphics without any crazy shadows or effects or crazy ray tracing, reflections, and nose hairs. And the first impression from most players is that the game looks like a game that was released all the way back in 2016, which is fair. It may not be the prettiest game, but in my opinion, these so-called bad graphics don't have to be a bad thing. While the graphics may not be as visually appealing to the eye as you might want them to be, especially in this day and age where it's apparently so important that you can see the mustache hairs on the main character of that chick from Horizon Zero Dawn. Personally, I think Ubisoft's approach is the right one. Simpler graphics make it easier to see what's going on at all times, which leads to a more competitive and, in my opinion, more enjoyable experience. I don't care how many teraflops of my GPU is being used, I just want to be able to see what I'm shooting at, instead of it being impossible to make something out against the background, which could lead to kills that may or may not have been deserved just because they happen to be in shadows or in an overly sized bush. The simpler graphics also make it a lot easier to read what is happening on the screen at all times. I mean, during my playtime in XDefiant, I never really felt confused about what was going on in front of me. I can easily tell what is going on, which lets me make the best decision moving forward. Hell, the game even has the infamous yellow markings on almost everything that can be climbed, just to make it overly clear for any player, old or new, whether an enemy can climb over that wall or not. The simpler graphics have an additional, maybe even more important factor as well. It keeps the game running light. And as much as I love the finals, it's no secret that at this moment in time, trying to run the game at a decent frame rate takes a really beefy PC, whereas XDEFIANT, in the words of PC Gamer, has its requirements so low that even a manky old potato can run it. In addition to that, XDEFIANT, just like the finals, are taking the opposite approach of what most AAA companies seem to be doing these days, and instead of clamming up and ignoring their own community, sometimes with a very thick air of superiority, they take more of a hands-on approach. They take all the feedback from the community, and they're actively communicating with the community about the state of the game and what they're working on. I mean, within just a few days of the game's official release, Mark Rubin and the XDEFIANT team had already clarified on over 20 separate topics about the game, including, but obviously not limited to, jump spamming, netcode, snipers being too overpowered, cheaters, kill camps, radical customization, and so much more. And while the updates haven't hit yet, knowing that the developers are aware of these things and where they want to take the game makes it much easier to stay with the game through the tough times, because you know that in some time it will be better. Something else that I find really smart about XDEFIANT is that it acts as a collaboration between other large Ubisoft titles. We can see maps from The Division, from Splinter Cell, from Far Cry, and more. I didn't really bother to figure out what the other maps were, with the playable factions in the game spanning from these games as well. The game already starts out with collaborations, which is something we've seen work wonders for Fortnite time and time and time and time and time again. And time and time and time. You get it. This introduces fans from those other franchises into XDEFIANT and makes the XDEFIANT player base likely to check out those other franchises or games as well. And seeing as these franchises all belong to Ubisoft, it's a win-win. When done right, almost all collaborations between media, especially games or movies or shows, brings attention to all the parties involved and strengthens the player base's own relation with the media that they are familiar with, whether that is the game or the show or whatever, maybe even sometimes both. And these features, while to some somewhat controversial, are all in my opinion some very good things that XDEFIANT brings to the table that many other AAA games don't seem to dare to do themselves. I don't know if it's because of shareholders or old values or whatever, but it's not happening. And now whether the average gamer, especially first-person shooter gamer who has gone through years of AAA slop, can appreciate what XDEFIANT is doing or trying to do is going to be up to time. And in a way, it will tell us the direction that gaming will be going in releases moving forward. Is the game going to succeed, meaning that we will see more games with freedom of skill expression without rigged games or unbalanced inputs? Or is the game going to flop, where the AAA studios realize they can just double down on their tactics that could only be described as gaslighting with $400 skins? Who's gonna pay $500 for an Ari skin? Let's be honest. Time will tell, and even though I don't play the game that much, for the sake of gaming, I am cheering on from the sidelines, and I hope that more developers are gonna follow its suit. Anyways, that was my thoughts on it. Thanks for watching. Peace out.